Well, for more analysis, then, David Schultz joins us on the program. He is a distinguished university professor in the Department of Political Science, Environmental Studies, and Legal Studies at Hamline University in Minnesota. Professor Schultz, thank you very much for joining us today. So, to start, I mean, you've, of course, written dozens of books on various aspects of American political life. Is what we're seeing in Los Angeles unprecedented, a tipping point of sorts?
It is a tipping point, and it is unprecedented. We need to understand a few different things here in terms of the law. First, in the United States, we have the First Amendment, which guarantees a right to protest. Certainly not violent protest, but a right to protest as a form of free speech. That's the first thing to think about. Second, there is a law on the books that dates to after the U.S. Civil War, that is roughly in the 1870s, that bars the use of the military for domestic policing purposes. And then a third law, which is important, is that generally the National Guard is under the control for domestic purposes by governors and can't be called out by the President of the United States. What I'm getting at here is that we're seeing an incredibly unusual situation here where the president is bringing in U.S. military troops, which appears to be a violation of federal law for domestic policing, when it should have been, if at all, the responsibility of the governor of California to make a decision regarding whether he needed the National Guard to come in. So there's a lot of complex legal issues here about presidential authority, state authority, about free speech rights, rights to protest, that are really sort of unfurling here. And the fact that federal troops are coming in, again, we haven't seen anything like this since, I think, the early 1990s, when Rodney King was assaulted by police officers. It's highly unusual. And as we're seeing, the bringing of these troops is probably not calming the situation, but just really inflaming an already tense situation.
From a legal perspective, sir, in order to justify, this decision to deploy the National Guard in Los Angeles and some of his other actions elsewhere, Trump routinely makes use of the argument that the U.S. is facing a national emergency with respect to the budget, national security, immigration, and other things, the goal being to justify the use of rarely invoked emergency powers. I mean, what kind of crises do you think that the authors of these statutes had in mind when they included them in the law? And why do you think that Trump's use of executive authority goes beyond what may have been intended?
Well, this is interesting because the law that he's invoking is called the National Emergencies Act, that dates back to the 1970s. And originally, national emergencies were things like major natural disasters. They were like World War II. Some of these laws dated back. And what was happening is presidents were basically abusing their emergency authority. Congress gets rid of all the emergency powers, or rather emergencies in a place in the 70s, and supposedly limits, with this new law back in the 70s, the ability of a president to be able to invoke emergencies except in certain situations. What's really happened now, we're seeing, is 50 years later, is that this law is either being violated or it's no longer able to contain presidential power. And Trump is exploiting this law, which again was really meant to limit presidential power. And so what he's saying is we have a national emergency, and therefore it allows me to do certain types of things. All of this is highly questionable because the National Emergencies Act does not give the president new power or new authority to do things. It merely says that if the president declares a national emergency, he may use certain powers that are already in the law that are not otherwise given. So from my reading of the law, and again, I've taught law for many, many years, Trump is misusing the law. And this is partly, I think, the challenge that Governor Newsom is bringing in federal court.
For now, National Guard troops seem to be quite passive. They're not taking part in arrests. They've had little interaction with protesters. Do you see this as a real, genuine federal crackdown, or more of Donald Trump trying to kind of flex his muscles by creating the illusion of something more serious?
I think it's a little bit of both. So first off, if we look at the area in Los Angeles where the demonstrations are occurring, it's in a very small area, and it looked like initially the protests were what blockades and so forth, things that could have been addressed with regular policing. So it's really debatable regarding whether or not you even needed to bring the National Guard in. Once they came in, that of course escalated, and now bringing in the federal troops escalates it more. The reason why I'm saying all of that, there's a little bit of showmanship here in terms of what Trump is trying to do, which again, remember, he is on one level a person who is kind of a showman, likes to sort of make big statements. And so I think he's trying to basically flex his authority. And this is a state, and this is a governor, California and Newsom, that did not support him in his two presidential campaigns. And so I think there's also a little bit of a sense of what retribution, or trying to sort of say, I'm president, you're not. You're going to do what I want and do what I say.
Professor David Schultz, that's unfortunately all we have time for. Thank you so very much for joining us
Sure.
today.